it's a very apt time to be talking about this topic, because notwithstanding, I think, the optimistic tone that was struck by the previous panel about where we might be going, the fact of the matter is where we are is not a good place. And even in the last few months, there have been a number of scandals relating to brands ranging from Loro Piana and Armani to more fast fashion brands like H&M, Zara, American Eagle Outfitters, Under Armour, relating to really serious human rights abuses in the supply chain that persist despite years of effort to shift the way the industry operates. And I want to start, Lola, by coming to you as to why we find ourselves in this situation, because you've been really involved from the beginning in the UK in trying to build policies to get the industry acting on this.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for inviting me along this morning. First of all, just to correct you, Sarah, not at the beginning, and I think this is one of the issues, that actually people have been agitating for this for decades, and way back. I mean, you can go back, if you like, to the transatlantic slave trade.
Indeed.
People were agitating for non-slave picked cotton. So actually, we've had a lot of time to think about this, and with all the advantages that we have today, we should be further ahead. So I only got involved in 2010 or something like that, when there were already people like Ursula de Castro, Olivia Firth, etc. All of these people were agitating then and making very little headway. So what I would say on the positive side is that there have been some developments over the past few years that I've been working in the sector, but nowhere near enough. And that is why I feel very strongly now that we've come to the point where part of the why is it's all voluntary. It's all, yeah, let's, we all kind of want to be green together. And of course, we don't want modern slavery in our supply chains. And then every time something happens, with the examples that you've said, it's like, oh, well, we had no idea such things were going on. We've been carrying out audits. How could this possibly happen? How could you possibly not know that this is happening at this day and age? So to me, the solution, well, not all of the solution, because there is no one magic bullet, but really robust legislation, as you might imagine, that I'm in support of, and I've got a private member's bill to prove it. Really robust legislation that says, if you don't do this, you will be penalised. And if something happens in your supply or your value chain, which is what we've put in our bill, you will be penalised as a criminal, actually. You will be committing criminal offence, and or you will be subject to civil liability, 10%, up to 10% of your global turnover. And I think that stick is what is needed now. Other incentives, sure, absolutely. But the why is, I think, embedded in what I've just said.
So there has to be real accountability and consequences if these rules are not...
Consequences is the big word. Absolutely.
And, like, big consequences.
Big consequences, and that's aside from reputational damage.
Right, which we do see already. And, you know, Simon, I wanted to come to you just to build on what we've discussed, because you have this quite unique perspective in that you've spent many years working within a large brand on these issues, and now you're sitting within the industry still, but outside of the brands themselves. You know, having tried to tackle issues of workers' rights from within a brand, what is holding back action internally at companies?
Capitalism.
Elaborate.
Listen, I don't want to disagree with the gentleman from Levi's earlier, but I do think there's a consumer part in this. Nobody should be not allowed to purchase things, whether it's based on their affordability and so on, but there is an element of, come on, this idea that ignorance can be used as an excuse to not understand what you're doing. This doesn't cut it. It doesn't cut it in law, anyway, and it certainly doesn't cut it in industry. Now, it's kind of, we're at the point now where you kind of feel a bit poacher turned gamekeeper, so if you're a brand out there, I'm about to throw you all under the bus. No, I'm not. What I'm trying to do now is to put across the challenges and the difficulties that we feel we have within the industry, but also to encourage engagement in technology and innovation and what's coming down the road to ensure that the right things are done. So, you know, Lola just mentioned hundreds of years ago we were campaigning to abolish slave-picked cotton. What was it, 16th 18th of April in 2024, and we're still trying to do that. And it's still happening. Might not look the same, but it's still happening. So we've had long enough to tidy the bedroom up, and we've been told enough times by our parents that the bedroom's going to need tidying up or it's all going in the bin. Well, it's going to go in the bin when you get home tomorrow, sort of thing. You know, we really need to start understanding, you know, using the excuse that I didn't know or it's very difficult to get my supply chain. You can't use that excuse anymore. You can choose to ignore what you know, but you can't say you didn't know. And that's someone else's quote, not mine, but it's still very, very relevant. So I think for me, it's about now stepping up to the plate as industry, absolutely supported by the right legislation, because the stick is needed. That's the chucking it all in the bin job. It's got to force a change, because we've not dealt with the you know, I mean, this is about environment as well. The social issues are linked to environment. It's all interlinked. We keep pushing them into different areas, but they're not different areas. They're all linked. The pressures on consumers, if you kind of unravel all this, you'll see it all goes back to just human rights and laws, and the correct laws. What we don't want is legislation that ticks one box and unticks several others and creates a ripple effect that really will impact, you know, global communities. And we saw at the very, very beginning what's been going on in Mexico, and this is, you know, Dubai is underwater. What? I didn't think it ever rained there anyway, let alone, you know, and it's not cloud seeding, whatever that is. This is environment. So yeah, it's time.
And so to unpack that a little bit more, maybe bring us up to the present day, where do you see the regulatory landscape at the moment? You've obviously got private members bill that you've put forward. Are you seeing shifts elsewhere, even if in the UK, you know, we've got to get through an election before things start to move forward here?
Yes, and that's a point to which we may return. Around the EU, obviously, the EU had a big struggle to get what's in shorthand, I think it's CSD3.
Yeah, CSDDD.
Yeah, so sustainability. Yeah. And it's eventually a version of that has come through. So that will be law across the EU. And for any companies that think, well, that doesn't affect us because we're no longer in the EU, then you're dreaming, because if you want to do business with any of the countries within the EU, you will have to satisfy those businesses that you comply, because otherwise they'll get it in the neck. They don't want to get it in the neck, so they won't work with you if you haven't got really good strategies and plans that are implemented and monitored in place. So that's one thing. And then individually, France, Germany, Norway, the Netherlands all have much more stringent legislation, actually, I would say, than what we currently have. And that's obviously a reason why we wanted to go back to the position of saying, what is it that we really need to do? And it's important that we've mentioned that in our bill, it's about prevention, right? So no longer sort of looking backwards and saying, oh, yeah, well, you know, wish we could have done this. This is a duty to prevent. So when you're caught out, if you haven't got those strategies and plans and the implementation plans in place, you've got no defence. And as I say, you could be subject to these penalties. So I think around the world, and those aren't the only ones, they're the ones that I can sort of remember offhand, those aren't the only pieces of legislation. So wherever you're going to do business, you're going to have a problem if you haven't got these mechanisms in place. Now, what I think, I hope Simon would agree with me on this, most good businesses already are halfway there, at least. You know, it's not a huge step going forward. So what is the big deal? And trying to separate out human rights from environmental sustainability is a non-starter. Again, I go back 200-300 years. The two were absolutely linked together then. So, you know, they're linked together now. And as you've said, ignorance is no defence in the law. You can't say, well, I just didn't know. You know, if I come and chuck a whole load of bleach in your drinking water, and then say, oh, I didn't know it would kind of kill everybody. That's no defence.
Not touching that.
But you know what I mean? It's like crazy. And why do we, you know, we actually have a lesser standard for corporations than we do for us as individuals. That's mad. You know, so yeah, I just think that we have to move forward, and that legislation, as I say, isn't the only way, but it will be a huge part of that because it will signal intent. And then the other thing, as you say, is we've got to have that properly monitored and implemented. So I think one of the problems with the Modern Slavery Act and Section 54, transparency in the supply chains, was that it was never really, it was so half-hearted.
And just for those who don't know, what that does is it requires
yes. What that required was every business in Britain with a turnover of 36 million pounds or more has to report on has to make a statement about what it's doing around modern slavery. And it was so light touch that you could actually make a statement which says, we're not making a statement, we've got nothing to say. And that would have been acceptable. And even given that, thousands of businesses still did not comply with that section because it wasn't obligatory, it wasn't mandatory, and it wasn't monitored. So that's kind of failed in many respects. It kind of introduced a new element into the conversation, let's say. So for that, it was useful. And it kind of upped the game for some businesses. But as I say, for those that are ahead, and with this bill, I have to say, we've got sign-off from many businesses in this country. Many businesses, dozens of businesses in this country. Some of the largest corporations, companies in the country are supporting this bill. They're begging for tougher legislation. And
because
then
it levels the playing field.
Sorry, yeah, exactly. Because why should they strive to be ethical and sustainable when some other person down the road or some other company down the road isn't bothered? So, you know, we're talking about duty to prevent, which I think is really important. And if I may, if I could just slip in another important thing, because it often comes up in these conversations, is do you just pull out when you find something that's not right in your value chain? And we say, no, you've got to, if you're going to pull out, unless there's something incredibly urgent, like some conflict or something, you've got to do it in a staged way, because it is completely unfair and, again, unethical to just suddenly withdraw from your factory and leave all those people, however poorly they've been paid and treated, to kind of just dump them in it. And that's what some companies do. They just say, oh, well, now we've polluted all your rivers and, you know, created diseases that have led to thousands of your babies dying. Okay, yeah, we're being taken to court, so bye-bye, off we go. That is completely unacceptable. So it's responsible disengagement.
And I think what's just important to underscore about what you said and what's changing now is we are moving to a moment, an inflection point, where a lot of these practices in some countries are being regulated with a real stick. And that is very different from what we've seen for the last decade. And I think is a reason why companies really need to be paying attention in a way maybe they haven't until now. But Simon, coming back to you, you made the point that there's no excuse now. You can't look away. But actually in practice, what do companies need to be doing internally in order to comply with these things?
Well, as Lola said, make a start. Understand your supply chain. There's dual materiality. There's two reasons. One is the moral.
Wait.
Sorry, go ahead.
Explain dual materiality.
Dual materiality. Well, one is dual materiality is around you should be doing the right things from an ethical, sustainable point of view, because that's good
So
for
it's considering
business.
both the financial and ethical impact of the business.
But also understanding the value of that, knowing your supply chain, having those conversations, knowing what your customer is looking for. So there's commerciality. So if your CFOs are not getting on board because actually the pressure's on because it's not a level playing field and someone else is eating at our table and our profits are down, therefore we can't afford to do this. Think about what's coming in terms of legislation, regulation. You won't be able to sell in this region. You're not getting the best deals because you don't know your supply chain anyway. Get them over the line on the commercials, whether that be the now commercials or the future, because the two things, again, go hand in hand. And then thinking about from a customer point of view, you know, we do have to bring the consumer into this. We have to educate. And the new generations, the alpha generation, will be asking more questions. And if they were to think that whether it's cheap or not, that their clothes were made using poor behavior, poor practice, or detrimental to people and planet, they're going to start to vote with, you know, a little bit more perhaps less than the millennials, and maybe even the Gen Zs who have been used to just take.
Why haven't we seen that happening yet?
Honestly, I don't know why people aren't quite walking the walk, because there's enough out there now. We've seen the various different programs about environment, the news. It's not a hidden thing, but it's pressure. It's economic pressure. People's, cash that they have to spend. They've got to choose what they spend. And if you are offered, the human nature is to go to where it is. But the reason it's down there in the first place is because to do it a little bit better, you're not making the profit and someone else is not doing it. And then you get to this very uneven playing field. And that is where legislation and laws and taxes, whether it's putting a duty on cheap imports like we do cigarettes and alcohol, well, maybe cheap imported clothing should have a duty on. There's a social impact, there's a health impact to loads and loads of cheap clothes, there's an environmental impact. So, this is something, I was in Parliament yesterday talking about this. And these are the kind of things we need to make sure the right legislations are in place that support, what Adam was talking about and Caroline at the beginning, a new economy for the UK, and then that spreads out and becomes more global. But the brands need to just make a start and be making commitments and then being transparent on those commitments.
So just to delve deeper into that, make a start on what exactly? Well,
traceability is the thing. You've got to know your supply chain. You can't use the excuse, well, I don't know where my material comes from, or I didn't know what the dye stuff was doing, or I didn't. You can, but you shouldn't, and you can't, because you're not being responsible socially, environmentally, or commercially. And I'd urge CEOs and investors and consumers to be asking for that level of transparency, because then things are being done properly. There is so much innovation and tech, and there'll be more conversations, and there's people here today that can, like Trust Trace and so on, that can help you on that journey. It's now becoming, like I said at the beginning, I'm joking a little bit with the capitalism side of things, but it is about now ensuring that purpose and profit are aligned and not dealt with as two individual polar opposites. Purpose and profit should go hand in hand. And that's what I think consumers, investors, employees, workers in the industry, all of us want to see is a good, solid, healthy economy within the fashion industry. We're sitting here talking about things like that recently were in the press around Armani in Italy and Under Armour, and people committing suicide that have been trafficked from one country to another, women being raped, people being murdered because they were lobbying for better wages. This isn't a drug dealers seminar today. This is a fashion industry thing. Why is this even a thing? So no wonder governments are like, well, sorry, you've had enough time. It's now time for us to step in. And having them step in and step up, absolutely. But if we don't work with that to ensure that the right legislations are in place, and that the people that are making those laws understand what the impacts are of various things, then, yeah, I think there could be that's got to be the thing. That's the thing I was talking about earlier. It's not my quote, it's his quote. William Wilberforce. But, it's absolutely bang on. You can't use it, and that's customers as well. I know we need to get our own house in order, but I think it's now time to sort of, broaden on this.
So it's the idea that we all know what the issues are, and we're all complicit in having ignored them.
Yeah, and if I said to a person on the street, look, I can get you a flat screen TV for 50 quid, the £5,000 in the shops. Okay, great. What, you didn't know there was something dodgy about that? You can't use that anymore.
What is the role of government here to ensure that any regulations that they bring in are enforced? Because that has also been an issue where tougher rules have come in, but over time, it's kind of been seen that no one's really checking.
It's a huge question and very complicated. And, when, as you say rightly, we're all complicit, governments are complicit too. Politicians, parliamentarians, we're all complicit because we haven't done enough and pressed home hard enough what needs to change. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that. As we said earlier, one way or another, we will have a different set of faces in government. And there is some hope that there might be a government which is more aware of and committed to doing something about. I don't expect any statements from the Labour Party at the moment saying as such, because it's kind of one of those moments where you're hedging your bets and what are you going to say and what you're going to keep up your sleeve, as it were. But I would, that's part of what we're trying to do, is to say that with the bill, here is a ready-made piece of legislation for you. If you implement this, we will once again be able to say we are world leaders in this field, because we're combining human rights and sustainability. We're talking about value chains, not just supply chains. And we're talking about an implementation that would have a regulator. So we've got in here a regulatory body that would be an amalgam of what we've already got, plus some new elements to implement, to make sure that it's being implemented. Even the bits of the Modern Slavery Act that don't apply to supply chains are not being fully and totally implemented in the way that they should be, because otherwise we'd see many, many more prosecutions, but at least something has happened. But on the bit with supply chains, transparency, not a single company has been served an injunction as a result of not completing a statement since 2015. That is the law. You complete a statement, it has to go on the front page of your website, and if it doesn't, you could be served an injunction by the Home Secretary. Not a single.
So even that pretty simple step, companies aren't doing it and are not being prosecuted.
Easy to see. Loads of us have done analysis of the statements, et cetera, et cetera. So can I just come back to the consumer piece?
Yes,
though,
please. I saw you.
Just very quickly, because I actually agree with Paul what he was saying about, because I always have in my mind this single parent who's got 4 kids who need their gym kit by Monday, and it's Saturday morning and you still haven't worked out how you're going to feed the family. You are not going to be going through reports and statements and what have you. You just want whatever it is you can afford. And I think also it's a little bit, the fashion industry has groomed us, if I can use a provocative term, groomed us into thinking that all our problems about self-identity and insecurity and lack of confidence will be solved if only we dress like whoever the latest fashion icon is. And we keep, all of us, and myself included, we keep getting sucked into this discourse. And that is something that we really need to challenge, because that is at the heart of your response about capitalism. Is capitalism, the form of capitalism that we've been pursuing for the last 200 or so years, means that you have to keep producing more, and that development is equated with producing more things that people don't really need and then throw away, because then you can get them to buy more things that they don't really need and throw away. Hence, this is where we are. And so it's in our hands, but it is in our hands to do something about it. I don't feel negative or pessimistic about it. And I think particularly with the fashion industry, which unlike a lot of other industries, nobody sort of thinks that they walk along the pavement, I wonder who produced these paving stones, although I think actually more of us should, because there's a big problem in the construction industry too. So it's not only the fashion industry, but I think in the fashion industry, there's all of this creativity, there's all of this kind of innovation, and there's also, just generally speaking, a kind of will not to be bad at the bottom line. So we need to keep pushing, and I'm sure the sector can do it, but it's going to have to make some sacrifices. It's going to have to change the way it works and change its thinking about who are you in business for? What are you here for? Why? In 50 years' time, should we survive? Who's going to look back and think, are we going to look back and think, oh, the fashion industry led on preventing these abuses? Or are we going to say, oh my God, the fashion industry has brought us to this apocalyptic space that we're in now? So that's the choice to me. It's a little bit simplified, but that's what it seems like to me.
It's pretty, we're here for new designers and materials that can be reused, innovation downstairs, celebrate British fashion and so on. And this is a bit of a downer, isn't it? So let's just not have it in our industry. And same from an environmental point of view. We can be we can be what we say we are if we choose to do that. And it is a choice. like I say, you can choose to ignore or you can choose to do something now. So
I think that's a great point to end it on. You know, we're not going to solve it today.
No.
But there's so much that can be done. So thank you both so much for your time in this provocative talk.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Cheers.